Guys, DStyleBoxing here. Check it out. So I was watching an interview that Joe Rogan was doing with Josh Barnett, um, MMA heavyweight, was former UFC heavyweight champion. Um, he also fought in Pride and Pancrase and stuff like that. But anyway, I believe he did. Did he fight in Pancrase? I'm not sure. I think he did, but I could be wrong about that. But anyway, he had an interview with Joe Rogan, and they were talking about the Conor McGregor, surprise, surprise, Conor McGregor versus Mayweather fight, and he said something that I believe was very brilliant. Right? I'm paraphrasing here, but you could look up the interview if you want. And he said something along the lines of, when you look at complete fighting, which would be what MMA is, right? Where just not everything, but for the sake of argument, everything's allowed, from the ground to stand up, aside from some obvious illegal tactics like eye poking and stuff like that, or low blows. You know what I mean? And he's basically saying, but once you start going the avenue of placing more and more rules on any given combat sport, in this case boxing, right? As you start taking away things that you're able to do and you start limiting what you can do, you start to see a transformation and a specific of a specific type of athlete for that given sport. And that's what you have in boxing, right? Now, this is something I've always said, and not so much in those words, but in the sport of boxing, there are certain qualities that you need, for the most part, right, to be a professional boxer, right? You transform yourself specifically for that sport, right? I mean, so boxing has a specific type of athlete. So does Muay Thai. So does kickboxing, right? I mean, that's just the way it is, right? And I just thought that was obvious. I just thought that was very well put by him, right? Not everybody could put it well into words like that, right? Kind of like Josh Barnett, but anyway, just something I felt compelled to kind of do, because I felt like, what, this is brilliant. This makes a lot of sense. And which brings me to this, right? Because you always hear a lot of mixed martial arts fans, it's kind of strange, right? Because what they bash boxing for, boxing is like that on purpose, right? It's kind of weird. But anyway, you always hear them say, oh, come on, boxers, they only work hands. Like they don't use knees. They don't do wrestling. They don't do joint locks. They don't do arm locks and arm bars, and they don't throw elbows. They don't wrestle. They don't do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. They don't do any of that stuff. And my response has always been the same. Number one, duh, right? I mean, well, no shit. Right? You don't say, right? And but better than duh, right, is the fact that professional boxing, right, the sport of professional boxing, it is limited, right? But it's not limited. See, what I've always said this, and I think most get it, right? But boxing is not quite like other quote-unquote martial arts, okay? There's something uniquely different about boxing, meaning the sport of boxing, prize fighting, right, was specifically built for entertainment. That's basically what it was built for. Boxing as we know it today was not built to show people how to defend themselves, okay? Now, because the hands in boxing are so lethal, yes, a lot of people learn how to box to learn, self-defense, especially before the Western world was really exposed to a lot of, martial arts, of course. But you have to understand, like, it's like no one designed boxing with the intent of showing people how to defend themselves in the streets. That's you're not going to find that anywhere in the history of boxing. That was never the intention of boxing, right? Now, again, this doesn't mean no one's ever defended themselves. If they have very good hands against some average dude, of course you're going to beat their ass. But that's not that was never the basis behind boxing, right? If it was, why would it outlaw things on purpose? Okay, why would it outlaw elbows? See, it wasn't till the London Prize rules came along, and then the Marquis of Queensberry especially, that a lot of things that would be considered effective in a street fight were outlawed on purpose. Okay, they were removed from the equation. It evolved into a pure fist fight. And I've always argued it wasn't till a lot of Asian cultures, exposed to the Western world, that we really knew how effective kicking could be. It's that's something that really evolved in those countries. But I don't know if current Western boxing would have evolved into kickboxing, right? There's no way to know that, but there's a really good chance it could have, right? But one of the reasons you can argue it wouldn't, now that I'm thinking about it, is because they wouldn't fight in canvases back in the day, right? And they would fight a lot in dirt, which is why when you read London Prize rules, and I remember I looked it up because I wondered, well, why the hell are these guys wearing like steel boots and shit like that? Like, I always wondered, like, what the fuck is that about? And then you kind of read into it, and that's the reason why. So I don't know how many people would want to be barefoot on fucking dirt and shit. But anyway, right? Boxing evolved into what it was, right? And things started once guys were holding too much in the corners or hugging each other or wrestling, and I mean actual wrestling, right? Before the London Prize rules, it all came down to like contractual agreements. If there was no contractual agreement, you could take a dude to the ground, right, and beat his ass that way. Those things were outlawed, right? Those things were they were considered gentleman rules. We're not going to hit. You never hit an opponent when he's down. It's like an old gentleman rule that was made, right? This is how it evolved into the 10 count, right? So everything about boxing, right? The rule structure around boxing evolved that way, right? So over the years, boxing evolved, right? Once the Marquis of Queensberry rules were put in place, right? And that's not the end-all be-all of boxing rules, right? Now we have the unification rules or whatever, but my point is boxing began to evolve into what it is, all right? It's the tactics and the strategies that were used in a boxing ring, especially once it was pretty clear that it was going to be a 20 by 20 ring, 3 minutes of so many rounds, eventually 15 and 12. Once it was understood that we're going to have ropes, once it was understood that we're going to be wearing, gloves, the best of the kind of the whatever generation, right? Once all those things were understood, right, then we started seeing the athletes of boxing evolving because of that, right? You saw the evolution of boxing take place within that rule and structure. That's what makes boxing very unique as compared to other type of combat sports, right? That's what makes it very different. There's something, the history of boxing and the evolution of it, there's something very unique and different than what you see with other ones, right? Boxing limits itself by design. That's very few, if any, other forms of quote unquote martial arts. So I always make the argument boxing really is not really a martial art, right? But I'm not going to get into that debate right now, right? Other forms, right? When you really look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu never limited itself on purpose, right? Right? The actual art of it and what you learn from it, it never limited itself on purpose. Now, one may say, well, what about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments, right? Well, they're making an agreement to just grapple, right? That's an agreement that was made. That was not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys were fighting no holds barred for a long time, right? It's all these other forms, like for example, karate, right? You learn a lot of stuff in karate, right? They teach you self-defense in karate. Now, if you go to a karate tournament, they have rules. They all got this from boxing, right? Every single form of it, they got it from boxing. Rounds and stuff like that, and fighting in rings and stuff. All that came from boxing, right? At least in the modern era, right? And putting rules in it, making it some like a sporting event. It all came from boxing, all right? But as far as just Muay Thai has a history when you really read into it, right? In today's age, yes, it's a martial art, right? But the Muay Thai you see within those rules is not the only thing, right, historically that Muay Thai fighters learned, right? The same thing could be said about many other ancient forms of fighting, right? The only form that I could think of, they could say, yeah, that one was basically done under an agreement. That's Greco-Roman wrestling. That's about it that I could think of off the top of my head. Like Greco-Roman wrestling, you're not allowed to strike, for example, and that historically that's always been the case. That's been done since the Romans, if not before that. But that aside, it never became a spectacle the way boxing is, right? Because historically, wrestling has never really been found to be that entertaining. Okay, you could say, I mean, I respect collegiate wrestlers, and you know, it's a hell of a sport, but it never became a spectacle of an event. Like wrestling by itself will never attract like 100,000 people on pay-per-view to buy it. Like it's just, it isn't going to happen. It never has. That's why when boxing started, and I'm talking, if you go back, I mean, you got to go like before the London Prize rules, a lot of moves, right, that are definitely legal today were very legal in prize fighting, right? And boxing evolved away from that. So my point is, boxing evolved into limited rules. It's limited by design. It was purposely designed that way, right? If boxing wanted to make knees legal, it would have just made them legal, okay? If boxing wanted to make elbows legal, it would have made them legal. It evolved into what it is, into its very unique, type of combat sport that it is by design, right? So that's something I wanted to put out there. Mixed martial arts right now, right? I feel like in MMA, it's still in an evolution phase, right? It's still in a phase where they're kind of figuring themselves out. That's where it is right now. Like in boxing, we have a more clear understanding of what works and doesn't work, right? Because it has such a long history. We have a pretty clear understanding of what works and what doesn't in the sport of boxing. And in mixed martial arts, it's still in a phase where you just see a lot more upsets and stuff like that because it's unexpected shit happens, and because it's still in a phase where it's evolving, right? And in a way that makes it intriguing, okay? But that's why it's no, aside from some fighters, that's the reason why. I mean, 5 years goes by, and the guy that everybody thought was the best fighter in UFC history or whatever is just no longer really considered that anymore, right? I mean, you're seeing far more. I still remember when Matt Hughes was UFC welterweight champion. They said, "Oh, this is the best all-around, fighter in the UFC in the welterweight history." And then GSP came around, right? And he became the best all-around fighter in UFC history, right? You know, and now you have fighters that could just do a lot more in the UFC. You know, then John Jones came along, you know, and now you have just different fighters doing different shit. But anyway, um, one thing I am noticing about the UFC, although not to the degree that it happened in boxing in the early days, but in the UFC right now, right, the way it started is very similar to how prize fighting started. Okay, the very early stages of professional boxing. All right, and the difference is, however, is that in like when the UFC, for example, was first being formed, right, to be it was basically Gracie infomercials, what it was. Okay, but when that started, though, all these forms of combat had had already been like established and evolved for so long, right? Like in their respective form of combat, these things were like known. Aside from some, forms of martial arts that's just not effective, okay, that were really exposed early on in the UFC, by the way. Um, Aside from some of those things, what you really saw was, first of all, the grapplers had a huge advantage early on in the UFC, right? And I'm talking specifically Valetudo. You can go back with that shit, okay? But I'm gonna stick to the UFC here. Grapplers had the advantage at first, and then something happened that gave strikers a huge advantage. Okay, and that was the UFC glove, the MMA glove, that is, right? And once the MMA, because that's the hand, right? Our hand, we have to tape our hands, and if you put on gloves, gloves are meant to protect the hand. They're not meant to protect the other person's face, right? That's not what they're for. And if you were to tell me, let me tell you something, I'd rather get punched by a bare hand than somebody wearing MMA gloves, right? Because they can hit you hard as fuck and not break their hand, right? So this is why you started seeing boxing techniques being applied far more once the UFC implemented those MMA gloves, right? Um, they weren't really doing that. They were not applying boxing techniques in the early days of the UFC. Not by a long shot, aside from some kickboxers that were doing it, but that was few and far between. Few and far between, right? Once they got the gloves on, okay, they started implementing more boxing techniques, and that's why a lot of these UFC guys, they train a lot in boxing because, again, their hands are protected with gloves. But if there was no gloves, though, I hardly believe you would see strikers at the level of a McGregor or anything close to that, right? If they never had MMA gloves, if they remained like bare knuckle, I don't see that. And the grapplers would have a much better shot to a bigger advantage, that is, over a lot of these strikers, right? That's just an observation anyway that I kind of noticed, or at least from the times I actually followed UFC. I don't really follow it much anymore, right? I just don't. But I think you're starting to see an evolution in the UFC, man. And one thing that I noticed was I could tell why. When you look at the UFC today, you can see why boxing evolved the way it did, right? I mean, you have to put things in context, right? But as I mentioned earlier, so back when prize fighting started, keep in mind they didn't have knowledge of, you know, of the level of kicks and stuff that we do today. They didn't have knowledge of um, much to do with stand-up, really. Okay, they had knowledge of wrestling, but nobody really liked wrestling. Crowds hated wrestling, right? The crowds would boo, okay, in the wrestling. Regular wrestling, just shoot wrestling, right, was so unpopular that when they stopped doing it in prize fighting and it became like its own thing, it turned into professional wrestling, right? They started to fix it to make it more interesting, right? It's hard to believe today. Like nobody believes that WWE is real today, right? Like Vince McMahon's product. Nobody really believes that, right? Uh, Vince McMahon admitted it wasn't real since the 80s. Okay, so that way he didn't have to pay the commissions. But not so much in the 80s or 70s. But if you go back like to the 60s, 50s, a lot of people in this country thought wrestling was real, right? And they tried to simulate a real fight, right? But they have to fix it to make it more exciting, right? But anyway, in the UFC, I've just an observation. I've just learned that people don't really like the ground game that much. They want to see guys standing up. And when you look at in the history of the UFC, the most popular fighters, what really stands out is what they would do on their feet. Conor McGregor, knocking dudes out, they fall in love with him, right? Anderson Silva, he was a stand-up fighter. They fell in love with him. If you look at John Jones, he very good ground fighter, but for the most part, I mean, what he does on his feet, that impresses people, right? Um, and that you can kind of see why boxing evolved the way it did. You kind of see that. Now, I'm not saying that if it keeps going this way, eventually everybody just wants to see dudes stand up and fight, but that's the way it seems, you know? Like the more and more, like I'm telling you, like it just seems like more and more, the more um, the more these UFC guys learn how to defend against a takedown, the less and less we're seeing fights in the ground, right? They're happening less and less in the ground. They're fighting more and more on their feet. It's happening. It's just the way it is. Obviously, you got to know how to defend the takedown and stuff like that. But I'm just saying, right? Anyway, it just seems funny to me that when we go full circle, it always comes back to wanting to see guys fight on their feet. When it comes full circle, why is it that people want to see McGregor Mayweather so bad? Is it because it's if it was about wanting to see the best fight the best, which is something I personally care about, right? If it's really about that, then wouldn't you want to see McGregor fight one of the top contenders in his sport and Mayweather one of the top contenders in his sport? It really comes back to the word prize fighting. It really comes back to entertainment, and that's most people are okay with the fact that this is a straight up boxing fight, because when people think about it, it's just I don't know. It seems to me, right, that people want to see the stand up. People want to see what McGregor could do on just on the straight up boxing fight against probably the best boxer of this generation. That intrigues them, right? And they know regardless of how it goes down, it's going to be entertaining. And whereas if it was a MMA fight, somebody could ruin it by taking it to the ground. That to me seems to be the public perception, But anyway, with that said, I personally, to me, I think both sports are great. I believe they're their own thing. I would love to reach a point where people stop being curious and stop, what if this guy comes over here, and what if this guy goes over there, and how can this guy do it if he transitions to that, or how would he do if he transitions over there? I really hope we can just reach a point where, hey, you can't just jump to the other sport and become the man, right? And I believe anyway, there was a time where boxing fans believed you get a boxer, take him over there, he'll knock everybody out, right? And we're past that now. Like everybody kind of knows that's not true anymore, right? But we still have a lot of UFC fans that believe, oh yeah, my guy could just go over there and knock this dude out, right? And one thing that, back to Josh Barnett, right? And him and Joe Rogan were talking. He said, "Look, I think it was Joe Rogan that said this, but Josh Barnett kind of co-signed it. And he said, look, I can see why McGregor thinks, oh, come on, it's just hands, right? Like, I don't have to worry about anything else. It's just hands. Like, I could close the distance. I could land that left hand, right? They can. I have a good shot at this, But I think what Conor McGregor is going against. Like, think about what he's going against. Okay, like, I really want people to kind of grasp this, right? He's going against. I mean, keep in mind, when Mayweather was born, and well, not literally when he was born, but when he was a little kid, okay, and not straight out of the womb or nothing, but his dad, who taught him boxing, already had a bunch of knowledge. His dad, whoever taught him boxing, had a lot of knowledge. The person that taught him had knowledge. I mean, knowledge on top of knowledge on top of knowledge, right? Mayweather was being taught things that work in boxing from a very young age. Things that we just know works in boxing, right? No one's saying fighters can't still evolve the sport of boxing, but it's very minimal, right? I mean, it's gone through such an evolution that we kind of know what works and what doesn't. So from a very young age, over 100 years of knowledge was instilled in this dude's brain. This works, this doesn't work. This works, this doesn't work. Do this, this works. This works, this works. This works, this works. Learn this, learn that, right? I mean, from every pivot to every movement to every shoulder roll to every block to every counter to every pull counter to everything, to every check hook, whatever it is, every variation of the jab, every parry, every slip, the whole nine. Conor McGregor thinks he's just going to jump into boxing and think, well, I could just land something big. It's just hands. And the problem is he is faced, like, boxing is a sport where a specific type of athlete is built to box, right? Like, a specific type of athlete is required to participate in the sport of boxing. Mayweather, since a young age, was building himself and his body and mind to be a professional boxer. That's what he ate. That's what he drank. Okay? That's what he ran. That's what he trained. That's what he talked. That's what he thought. That's what he dreamed. Right? That's his body is built for boxing. Now, take Conor McGregor. Now, Conor may have started as a boxer, right? But number one must question, why did he not continue his journey in boxing? Now, let's say we say, well, because he had more of a passion for MMA. Fair enough, which is very possible. But in order to transition to MMA, it didn't happen overnight. He had to transform his body and mind to perform for that specific type of sport, right? And in turn, right, was no longer transforming his body and mind for the other sport, which is boxing. Like, everything like that MMA fighter needs to prepare for, in many cases, works against, the type of training you need for boxing. So you may work on checking kicks, or you may work on, building your legs to throw kicks and to block kicks and stuff like that. That's not quite the same, right? Like, the muscles you're building is not the same as you need for professional boxing. It's different. Nobody's saying that one cannot make the transition, but there is a transition that is required, right? That's why you can't just jump into another sport. That's why you can't just go do it. Just especially in a matter of, since they've been talking about it for a year, he's gonna Like, really? And the body is one thing. I mean, that's minimal compared to the mind. You know, the reality is that I think he's going to be surprised once he's in there and that left hand seems so far away from landing. You know, when he's kind of trying to, like, he may have like 2, 3 ways that he believes he can set up that left hand. If we're generous and say he has 10 ways, right, that he thinks he can set up that left hand. You know, but he's going to have to, it's not like he's not in there with someone who doesn't know what they're doing, right? He's going to have to figure it out while he's getting jabbed in the face. He's going to have to figure it out while he's getting countered. He's going to have to figure it out while someone who just has faster hands than him is beating him to the punch. And then when he finally gets that courage to throw it and he misses and he gets countered again, it's going to start, you know, before he knows it, seconds pass by, minutes pass by, you haven't done anything yet. But you're getting punished. So there's a difference in the sports, right? And just like a boxer is lost when he's taken down in mixed martial arts, which that's obvious, right? The thing about MMA is that things are obvious. You know, they're not, you know, there's not much to worry about as far as understanding. Like if you tell people, yeah, when a fighter gets taken down, he doesn't know what he's doing in the ground, right? That's, I get it, right? Everybody gets that. But they don't quite understand, you know, that, you know, let's say in the sport of boxing, you know, boxing from the mid-range and from the inside, like the phone booth, and the techniques that Mayweather has already mastered. I mean, he's already mastered these techniques. Like, it's McGregor's not going to master these techniques. At best, he could learn some of them, right? That's going to be foreign to him. He's not going to know what to do. He's going to be lost in there, right? He's going to have to try, and I think he'll feel a little comfortable on the outside because he's used to that range. But what happens when they close the range? You know, I mean, I thought if he's going to pressure him, like I don't know do you guys really think that he's going to hurt Mayweather with arm punches? Because that left hand that he hurts guys in the UFC with, he sets it up, right? I mean, he throws that with full power. Those are not arm punches. He has to set that up. So there's a dynamic there, you know, that I don't believe anyway people understand. You know, and as I watch some stuff, like here's something that I didn't even catch till recently. I started watching boxing fights that MMA guys and Muay Thai guys, by the way, were in, right? And I figured, well, come on. I mean, these guys grapple against the cage. They do a lot of wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? I mean, these guys, I mean, they do quote-unquote dirty boxing in the UFC. I mean, I'm pretty sure these guys are like, if you think, you know, Andre Ward's good at the clinch, I mean, you know, maybe, you know, he can come in and just start smothering Floyd and just grab an arm of his and just outbox him that way or something, right? And that's something that did cross my mind. But as I started looking at the evidence, it's something that became very evident to me, right? So number one, let's go over some of them here. I wrote them down. Victor Belfort had a professional boxing fight. I think he had two, but the one I saw, right, which is hilarious because people are acting like he just beat like this world beater, but the guy was a nobody, right? He was a quote-unquote amateur champion in the town of that town. Okay. All right. So anyway, in fairness, Victor Belfort dominated that fight. Okay, in fairness, he did. But the guy held Victor about 2 times, and the fight was very short. It was very short. And one could say, well, he didn't have to, but I just noticed that Victor just put his hands out and was just waiting for the ref to break it up. It's just something I noticed, right? Okay, well, so what? He dominated that fight. Who cares? So then, as I started watching other fights, these MMA dudes, they don't know what to do in the clinch. And it's very surprising, but then again, it shouldn't be surprising. Now, look, again, I'm not talking about what, like if anybody who watches MMA watches this or listens to this, that is, I know that if it was a regular Muay Thai clinch, or if it was, you know, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu match or a wrestling match, I know the MMA guy would win. I know that. But here's the observation. So clinching in boxing is very subtle, right? A lot of boxing fans don't realize that, because a lot of boxing fans hate clinching, or it just stands out. Like 3 minutes of clinching feels like an eternity to the boxing fan, right? So they just want to see action or whatever, right? MMA fighters, okay, like Connor, for example, he knows how to grab somebody from the back of the neck and throw a knee at him, right? He knows how to grab someone, hold them in the back of the head, and hit them that way. Okay, he knows how to grab someone and throw them to the ground. Okay, these MMA fighters know how to do a throw, right? The holding they learn, the quote unquote, is very violent, right? It's a very violent form. It's a very offensive, violent form of clinching. Okay, it's going to grab you, and I'm doing it for the purpose of harming you, right? I'm grabbing this arm because I'm going to pull you down, and then I'm going to go for a throw. I'm going for the back of your neck. It's just, that's what they're doing. In boxing, that's not really the case. In boxing, you're doing, there's an art to it. It's doing just enough to not be called out on it or have a point taken away. There is an art to it. You can't harm someone in boxing with your holding. That's illegal, right? But you can't just grab somebody and then throw them in the ground, or, it's just not the way it is. Okay, you can't shove. Okay, that's illegal, right? So there's an art to making it look like, hey, you're just trying to, hey, well, I don't know. I think he started holding me, ref. That's why even guys who start the holding can sometimes convince the ref that they're not the ones doing it, right? So there's an art to that. There is an art to that. And I just noticed from observations, now this is very limited amount of fights, by the way. But you would think like a UFC fighter would be, or MMA fighter, right, would be landing and then clinching the guy, holding him, controlling him, and then break it up and then boom, boom, and then boom, hold him again. That's not what they're doing. Because they've never trained for that. They don't even know how to do that. It's what they learn, okay, when it comes to any type of grappling or holding, is for the purpose of, like, even when they're against the cage and stuff like that, okay? I mean, they're used to using their open hand, grabbing somebody's wrists, okay, and putting it against the cage, and putting their head against their chest against the cage, and then going down, going for a double leg. Like, it's a different type of holding. It's a whole different world. It's the holding in boxing is very foreign. It's very foreign. So that's just something that kind of was a clear, anyway, observation of mine, right? And then, of course, just the Perry fight, which, I mean, look, I know I probably came off as an asshole, and, he's just a dude trying to make a living, okay? And I give him credit for trying the boxing, okay? It's fine, right? But keep in mind, I was doing that video in mind with people saying, the guys that, like Kenny Florian is getting on my nerves, okay? Kenny Florian is openly insinuating right? That MMA fighters spar top level fighters and get the best of them all the time, right? And I'll do like even audio about that later. I'm careful with audios here because I've been flagged before and shit. But it was just bothering me. It was just getting on my nerves, right? Um, but I think it's great that the guy tried it. I mean, he give it a shot. Good for him, right? But again, I didn't see like him controlling his opponent when they were in the clinch or anything like that. Like it wasn't even in his mind when he was in a boxing zone. It just didn't run through his mind. In fact, I've seen a lot of sparring between MMA fighters and by the way, I don't see what Kenny Florian sees. Okay, I always see the boxers getting the upper hand. But like when Lomachenko sparred, I forgot the dude's name. But Lomachenko was clearly taking easy on this kid and just getting the best of him. Okay, but like in every way. But I didn't see like they would tie up at times. I didn't see any like it's not what people think. Like they're UFC fighters. They'll get the upper hand in the clinch. And that's not what you think. It just isn't what you think, right? I think a lot of people are going to be very surprised. Come Mayweather and McGregor. I think they're going to be very surprised because Mayweather's going to hit him, and if they get inside, he's going to hold him. What's McGregor going to do? Throw him to the ground? Well, you can't do that. What's he going to do? Grab in the back of the neck and go for a knee? You can't do that. What's he going to do? Pull on his arm? Well, you can't do that either. Well, what's he going to do? Is he going to go for a double leg? You can't do that. That's illegal. Right? Okay, and if you say, well, he's going to you sort of start grappling with him and the ref's going to break it up by then. Like it's going to be these are 2-3 second things. It's still going to have the same effect, right? So I'm just letting people know that. I'm telling you, it's very, very different, right? And with that said, right, this type of shit is fascinating to me. It's fascinating, right? The fight's gonna happen anyway, so fuck it. You know what I mean? But I know. Look, I know a lot of boxing fans are sick and tired of hearing about this shit. Okay, I get it. But believe me when I tell you, and I'm sure by now you've caught on to it. There is a lot of people in the MMA community that they're just making it seem like Conor stands a great chance, and to me that's very disrespectful to boxing, right? And like I've said before, I don't know how many people caught this, but I've already said, like, I'm willing to put my channel on the line against any other channel. That if Mayweather loses, I'll delete my channel, right? I've never done that for any other fight. Now, I said I'll stick around. I'll take the roasting first, okay, and then I'll delete it. I'm not just going to disappear. But I need an MMA channel to put their channel on the line as well, right? If they're that confident that McGregor could win. It ain't going to happen, right? And this is not like anything like, I know people are going to say, well, you thought Horn was going to lose to Pacquiao, and you were wrong about that. Look, man, this is nothing like that, right? I don't think people understand, but it's nothing like that. This is not like a thing. Now, a lot of the arguments over there, they're weak, man. I'm sorry. Everything is, I don't know how he's going to do it, but Conor's always proving people wrong. Is Conor's story in MMA really that unique? Like people are making it seem? I'll give him the Aldo win. That was a big win, right? It was. But, like, first of all, he lost to Diaz. Like, he lost, right? And he arguably won the rematch. Arguably. Like, it's not like he dominated. That was a close fight, right? But he was a lot bigger. And like, okay. Diaz, he's never even been a champion, dude. Like, it's okay. Like, right? And then, of course, and I'll give him his last win. That was a very impressive win, you know. But Olivares has been beat before. Maybe not like that, but he's been beat, you know. But when people say, "Oh, I'm not going to doubt him no more," and "Oh, you don't understand," when Conor says he's going to do something, he does it. Like, well, man, Conor could say all he wants that it's going to be Floyd. It's not going to happen. Right? It's not going to happen. Anyway, but I wanted to put a historical context to it, and so there you go. Right? I got shit to do tomorrow that I'm not even looking forward to it. That's probably why I can't even go to sleep. But I'm gonna roll. Right? This is DStyleBoxing, and I'm out of here.